This panel discussion is going to be helping to bridge the gap here between the wireline and the wireless world, talking about front haul, back haul. And while we do have folks here from the local market, a lot of what we're going to be talking about does apply outside of New York. New York just happens to be obviously one of the largest cities in the world. We're right here. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Mike Collado, who is now with Corning. So welcome, and he will introduce his panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Alyssa. Thanks for the kind introduction. And so we're in the home stretch, everybody. So I'm definitely excited about this topic. I'm excited about it for a number of reasons. First of all, when Alyssa approached me and offered the opportunity to moderate this panel, knowing just about everybody on this panel and having personal relationships, really excited to be with this group of very smart and accomplished set of panelists and presenters. Secondly is I recently had the opportunity to join Corning, and when we talk about fiber infrastructure, I mean, that's essentially our vision at Corning is to go fiber rich and fiber to the edge. So very excited. It fits exactly with what I'm doing at Corning, and I think that it's a great topic. It's a timely topic for a variety of reasons, and we'll get into that in just a second. But I got into the in-building wireless industry back in 2004, and it didn't take me very long to have the revelation that you need a lot of wires to make wireless work. And we go to these conferences and we talk often about DAS, we talk about small cells, we talk about Wi-Fi, we talk about towers, but often overlooked is the infrastructure. And so folks that I've hired into the in-building wireless industry often come to me and say the same thing. Gosh, you really need a lot of wires, you really need a lot of infrastructure to make wireless work. And so once again, I think this is a great topic, and as well, the importance of fiber infrastructure, I think can be highlighted in some announcement that we're at Corning very proud about. Very large deal with Verizon this past week, and if you have the chance to go, and there's an interview with the two CEOs of our organizations, Lowell McAdam and Wendell Weeks, there's some really important observations and observations that fiber infrastructure is going to be the cornerstone to enabling 5G. And of course, the vision of 5G is 100 times faster throughput than 4G, what we're working with today. Extremely low latency, and that essentially fiber infrastructure becomes the catalyst that enables new applications for both consumers and the enterprise. It is really the sort of the unsung hero to enabling densification. And so I think we've got a great opportunity to wrestle with that topic. We've got, of our panelists today, we have three essentially fiber providers, dark fiber providers, that include Clarion, Comvid, and ZenFi. And then we've got some guys that are a little bit out on the edge of the network that own and operate the networks. Of course, I'm speaking about American Tower and Transit Wireless. So what I'd like to do is we're gonna have this. We're not gonna go through a bunch of slides, so don't worry about that. We're not gonna burn your eyeballs out with slides. What we are gonna do is have kind of a fireside chat. We're gonna wrestle with a couple of topics. We're going to invite you in periodically to ask questions of the panelists and to agree and disagree with some of the topics. And so let's go ahead and get started. What I'd like to do, please, is to ask our panelists because they can certainly make a much better introduction of themselves and their organization and their place within the ecosystem than I can. So if I could, let me go ahead and start to my left with my friend Ray LaChance over at ZenFi.
Thanks a lot, Mike. So I'm the CEO of a company called Zenfried Networks. We're a 3-year-old company that is focused on the New York Metro mobile market, and we're focused on providing underlying infrastructure. So we consider ourselves a fiber and co-location provider. So we build underlying network infrastructure to support the upcoming wave of densification. One of the interesting things happening here, as you might guess, is everybody's getting ready for 5G. So when we founded the company, we looked at it as an opportunity to be in the fiber space, get back into the fiber space, and to solve an upcoming problem of the requirement of delivering fiber to just about every intersection, every building in a dense urban environment like New York. So ZenFi, again, is a New York Metro network provider and solely focused on that densification effort.
Cliff.
Thanks, Mike. I'm Cliff Kane. I'm co-CEO of Cleareon Fiber Networks. We are also a New York City-based fiber network. Our focus is perhaps a little different, but we are a carrier's carrier. We primarily service the wireline carrier community with dark fiber, Ethernet, wavelength, and co-location access and transport services. So we open up our footprint to access enterprise buildings, and so we were looking. We've developed our core competencies around dark fiber, Ethernet, and wavelengths, and we're looking to extend that to the edge and extend that to the enterprises directly. So, our positioning in the market is really about being a transport and access provider, but what we're looking to do in the future is to push that carrier-neutral type of access and kind of reinvent that whole competitive access provider sector from the 90s and bring that out to the enterprise buildings. So that's basically what we do.
Great. If I could, let me skip one to Jason first, just keeping with the fiber providers first.
I'm not offended, Mike. That's okay.
Sure. I'm Jason Cohen. I've been in this space for about 30 years now. Along the way, launched and built or operated several of the companies that provide fiber in the New York space, such as Keyspan, Light Tower, OCG, Allied Fiber, and have done quite a few backhaul projects, both on the long-haul side, connecting towers through multiple states, as well as a lot of fiber in a number of metros up and down the East Coast over the last few years. And these days focusing mostly on the long-haul components.
Okay, Eric.
You sure you want to come to me and not go to
I was going to throw it to Alex just to burn you, but no.
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize to everyone who might have come here to see Syed Malachi speaking, who's our Director of Design and Construction for Transit Wireless. Unfortunately, Syed couldn't be here today, and you get me. Anyway, I'm Eric Mercer. I'm Director of Business Development for Transit Wireless. We're based here in New York City. When we started the company, Transit Wireless, a number of years ago, it was really focused as a neutral host DAS company to build infrastructure in the New York City subway system. Funny thing happened is that the industry kind of morphed a little bit, and in addition to supporting our wireless carrier customers as a neutral host in the DAS in that environment, there's been a Wi-Fi network that we were pretty successful with building in the subway environment, as well as supporting significant transit services, everything from public safety to their services regarding their train arrival systems. So to support our networks, from the very beginning, we went out and acquired our own fiber franchise with the City of New York in order to provide that connectivity, because from our standpoint, we were going to build so much in the New York market that was something that we needed to do and own ourselves. And so we have 5 data center base station hotel locations located throughout the city and have about 150 miles of fiber in the street going through the ECS and Verizon ducts in order to support the transit wireless network.
Okay, great. Alex.
Good afternoon. Alex Gamota with American Tower, Vice President of Real Estate. First off, I want to thank Alyssa and the other folks with the association for getting the invitation. This is a tremendous panel. I think folks here in the market know these are the who's who as far as fiber providers go and infrastructure in the city. So you may be wondering why American Tower is here, because we're sort of the quiet one when it comes to fiber. I thought it was a great idea to be included just because from an edge perspective, we have to make those decisions about fiber all the time, or connectivity. And I think as we get into the questions, hopefully I can add some insight as to what a company like American Tower might be thinking. I've been in the business, hard to believe now, almost 18 years. I've been with American Tower for about 8 years, and certainly have seen a lot of changes, and the need for fiber or connectivity is just tremendous, and there's no end in sight. So look forward to the conversation and any of your questions.
Well, great. Thanks, guys. And let's just jump in. And what I'd like to do is start from, again, a high level and talk about some of the overall market direction and trends. And in huddling up before we got up here, we talked about and identified some very significant things. And it's interesting, I think we observed that in a lot of ways, metro fiber deployments have a look a little bit like long haul deployments in terms of what's being deployed. We've basically fast forward to 100 gigabit E type of deployments, and so that's one of them. Of course, there's no secret about the data tsunami. Densification, and we heard some interesting observations throughout the day today. Things like what the need for fiber indoors, the need for fiber to densify it, that we're going to have a very dense network on the outside through small cells, and so I'm wondering. Cliff, if we could start with you, help identify a couple of the overall market direction trends. I mean, 5G might be one of might be the elephant in the room, but what are you observing?
Well, what we're doing is really building our competencies around delivering the transport layer for almost anything that the future may bring about. So dark fiber expertise, Ethernet expertise, wavelength expertise, colocation expertise, real estate expertise. These are kind of like in our DNA. We're positioning for the edge to become the most relevant part of the network. I think in many respects it always has been, but it's also the most challenging part of the network because the edge is varying and different from building to building. I think each building can be considered a snowflake from its construction to its population to its use to its ownership. So we're directionally we're focused on moving what we do as core competencies towards the edge. So in for example, like a CRAN topology, we would look to wire up a number of buildings for not only wireless applications like DAS, but also wireline to be able to distribute those services and be the neutral carrier that can deliver those types of services between the actual carrier and the customer, the tenant in the building. And similarly with the wireless guys. That's really where we're heading. So
okay. So, Jason, we had talked about this discovery that a lot of existing dark fiber is not capable of achieving the speeds and requirements of 100 gigabit E. Talk to me a little bit more about that observation.
Well, some of the older fiber that's out there, it's almost like you went out and bought a brand new Ferrari, but you only have dirt roads to drive on. So it's particularly in the long haul where nobody's built any real true long haul systems across the country in, over almost 15 years. So you get into the situation where people want to, run 100 gig, and in fact, We've got people talking to us right now about needing to run 400 gig out of the gate, and they need new fiber. They need fiber that is homogeneous through the system, because there's a lot of Frankenstein networks out there where, as you go through various regions, you're picking up fiber that was the result of different builds, different companies. They were brought together, split apart. So you've got all kinds of core mismatches and issues. But the bottom line is there's a huge, huge need right now for a lot more fiber to be built in the long haul. There's obviously a lot of builds going on in the metro, but now the problem is, how do you connect all those metros without new fiber?
Right. And so, Ray, you're actively building out your network. How does, what's changed in when you look at fiber to the curb?
Sure. So I'd like to back up for a second and just make a comment about bandwidth. I don't think bandwidth is the problem. When, fiber to the node will get the bandwidth we need, whether it's a gigabit, 10 gigabits to these edge antennas. I think that's clearly sufficient for today's needs. There's a more fundamental problem. I think it's a problem that all the legacy network operators are going to have to solve for, and it's really around architecture. The legacy networks that have been built to serve predominantly in a city like New York, large enterprises and the business community, and then there's also the cable networks. So when you look at those networks from an architectural perspective, take the large enterprise providers, those networks were built with very sparse density, right? They don't have a lot of endpoints in the corporate networks. They might hit hundreds or thousands of buildings in a city like New York. There's 600,000 buildings, right? There's 3,300 intersections in Manhattan. That's a small piece of the pie that has to be addressed. And you look at the cable operators, their networks. Those networks hit everything, but with very low capacity. So when you look at fundamentally what has to be addressed, I think the entire network architecture, the legacy network, becomes the backhaul network. And that's suitable out to cell sites, out to buildings for co-location facilities. But out of those co-locations, you have to reach out with what we call front haul infrastructure. And that's the fiber infrastructure that reaches out and touches antenna locations. Now your density goes from a building every few blocks with a couple fibers to it to an antenna every block, or multiple antennas on a block if you're going into buildings to support in-building systems as well as out on the street level. So the way I see this re-architecture, or we as a team see the re-architecture, is that the legacy network backhaul stays in place. You need to build distributed co-locations out throughout a city like New York, and then you reach out and touch the RF interface with front haul fiber. And that's that is what we really need to do to support the CRAN model. And to accomplish this, there needs to be a whole front haul infrastructure that needs to be built as a complement to what's already out there. So there's a big opportunity. High capacity and highly accessible front haul networks need to be built. They haven't been built yet, and to the density we need.
Okay. And so, Alex, we talked about centralization and colocation. As someone that owns and operates these networks, can you help, first of all, help us define and establish a baseline meaning for this, and how is that affecting your world as a trend?
Sure, no, that's a great question, and I'd be open if other people wanted to add to my answer. But I think it's, if you're a carrier, and most of our customers are the wireless carriers, you're really looking at three things when you're considering strengthening your network. It's the cost of achieving what it is you're trying to do. It's the speed of being able to actually deploy it and getting something on air. And then it's the predictability of that process. So if you think about those three factors, and the issue of co-location or centralization, that could be one of the solutions that a carrier would consider, because from a cost perspective, there's I guess there's indications that sort of model would make it more cost effective. There could be speed improvements with it. If you do what Ray's talking about, and you're using either a legacy network or maybe it's another new network, and then the predictability. Each one of those things in a co-location or a centralization model could be at play. And the idea here is that you're taking, the intelligence that's out at the edge and you're bringing it back to some sort of facility. Call it a data center if you want to, or a telco hub. The question is, how much do you bring back from those edge connections? And how many of these data centers or these telco facilities do you want to have? Because you also need to have some sort of redundancy depending on how big of an area each one of those telco facilities could handle. And I guess the other factor in all this that's driving it, which again, I think folks that are working in the New York market understand particularly from an outdoors perspective, is where do you put this edge gear? Where do you have, whether it's street furniture or street poles, where do you hide this stuff in plain sight? And I think if you look at those different aspects of it, it drives a company like American Tower to look at how do we deliver something for a carrier that can satisfy all those needs. And I think in a place like New York City, obviously this is a great test bed, petri dish, if you will, where I think we're figuring all those things out probably a lot sooner than other parts of the country.
I'd like to camp out on the topic of centralization and co-location a little bit more and invite Eric to comment, because obviously that's a significant part of the architecture of the infrastructure network that you've built.
Sure, that's how, our framework of our initial DAS build was our thought process was that, we didn't have the space within the New York City transit system in order to deploy equipment out at the edge at that time. So we built our own data centers throughout the city and used our fiber network in order to connect into each of these individual transit locations. However, I really agree with what Alex was talking about in terms of the price points on this. And without a central hub location and having that access to it, there's significant issues. But one thing that we all know, and it's prevalent within the industry, is that price points have to come down across the board, whether that's the fiber component piece of it, whether it's from a small cell perspective, whether you're on the OEM side or whether you're on the service provider side, as we're bringing services out to the edge and each location is only servicing so much of the capacity of a network, right? So within that, you need to make sure that you're having a cost-effective solution. And without a cost-effective solution, no matter how great of a service provider you are, it's not going to be something that you're going to get over the line when you start dealing with your customers to get something done.
Yeah. So, Ray, I remember a couple of years ago, you sat down with our friend Jeff Mphy at RCR Wireless, in fact, on the back porch of your offices, I believe, and talked about and wrestled with this notion of New York City being kind of the shining beacon, of this vision of how does New York City become a shining beacon for fiber infrastructure, something that rivals the stuff that's being done in South Korea. Where are we with that, and what needs to, does centralization and co-location play a significant role in making that vision a reality? And we just heard about price.
Sure. So New York's an interesting place. It's definitely one of the easier places to find a citywide infrastructure to install your network. It exists, and it's existed for many years, and there's a pretty well-defined structure from a conduit network perspective that it's congested, but it's there, and it's something many other cities don't have. So that makes New York very unique. The other thing that's pretty unique in New York is that there's been a thoughtful view of network infrastructure by the city. The city organization DoIT that oversees what we do from a telecom perspective has really thought through what a mobile franchise looks like, what a telecom franchise looks like, and they created rules of the game. Now, so we have the regulatory environment that's well organized. You know what the rules are, and we have a conduit system that's well organized. You know what the rules are with Verizon as the ILEC. And that stuff, makes things easy. What makes things very challenging in New York is it's a very congested environment, and it's also a very expensive environment to deploy network from a labor perspective. So, we've put in many thousands of miles of fiber over the years in different, with our three different businesses, and we've seen the cost of labor continually increase, the cost of duct space increase, but we haven't seen the prices increase commensurately. So we're getting this squeeze where cost of infrastructure, when you take franchise fees, you take duct rental fees, you take real estate taxes, you pile that on to just the underlying cost to be in the business. That's what makes New York more challenging. And what we find when providers come in to build their networks or to leverage existing networks, they get sticker shock. And that's one of the things Jeff and I talked about quite a bit. It's a great place to do business, a very expensive place, and if you do well, you can really knock it out of the park here in New York. On the other hand, it's got some unique challenges.
Great.
And Ray, you know this much better than I do, but one thing that we've experienced is that the physical challenges of the ducts, right? I mean, there's only a limited amount of duct space that you have, and that's being used up. So that's something that as we progress, it's building out that extra ductwork for Verizon, ECS, which they're not the easiest organizations to deal with. That's got to be a huge challenge, right, as far as getting that done.
No question. The point I made earlier, though, there is an infrastructure that's well organized. The problem is it's very congested, and we're looking for some sort of relief. And I think the traditional methods of installing fiber optic infrastructure in New York with a single-use duct and a serving one site off of a duct is not viable anymore. You really need to find new techniques, new ways of getting the most out of the duct system that's there, and there's got to be some level of overbuild that happens continuously, from Verizon's perspective, ECS's perspective, and maybe the city will get involved in helping out with this congestion problem, because it's, we're getting down. We build in New York every night. We have crews out every single night building network. We put over 1 million feet or 200 miles of access network in the city of New York in the past 15 months. And it's getting harder and harder for our guys to work. And we have a 3 million foot or 500 mile build plan over the next 2.5 years. So we're looking, that is a challenge.
So I'd like to shift gear for a moment and zoom in a little bit on the indoor space. And so we've heard some great presentations and observations today, some of which included, hey, the large public venue space. We talked earlier today about stadia, that a lot of most of the tier 1 stadiums have been addressed with indoor coverage. So we've got a mature market that characterizes the large public venue space, and then we also heard a little bit about as well this morning about the enterprise space, this office buildings, commercial real estate, things like hotels and hospitals, and that really started as a jumping off point for, hey, the wireless operators are retreating from desiring to fund these networks and expecting the venue to fund those networks. And I think I always observe that new problems require new thinking. And so from a fiber infrastructure perspective, and we heard as well, Boston Properties said, hey, it's stunning to me that we're still using coax in order to build these single-purpose DAS networks. And I think that kind of sends a warning shot to, if you want to be successful in the enterprise space, once again, new problems require new thinking. So I'm going to throw this out there for whoever wants to jump on it first from my panel. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing for indoor densification. What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? What does it mean to your business from a technology perspective as well as from a business use case perspective?
Yeah, Mike, I'll take that one. No, you're absolutely right in what the folks were saying earlier today. The market for venue-based or indoor cellular solutions has really changed a lot. American Tower, some of you may know, I mean, we've been in the indoor DAS space now over 12 years, really pioneered the whole idea of neutral host DAS. Now, curiously enough though, it was not, the business model for neutral host DAS really didn't follow our core business model of a tower. In a tower, you get the real estate, you build the passive infrastructure, and then you let the customers, whoever they may be, to put in their own technology and equipment and own and operate their own network. On the traditional DAS model, that's not what we did, and that's not what people in the industry really have done. So I would say about a year and a half, 2 years ago, in listening to our wireless carrier customers, we really heard from them loud and clear that they wanted to have the flexibility of similar to the tower model of putting in their own technology, owning and operating the active gear. So we have a product that we piloted and tested it, and it's been getting some adoption. We call it Intelligent Core Network, or ICN, where that's essentially what we do. And by doing that, it also lowers the cost for the carriers to join that network. And then more significantly, and I think, Mike, this gets to the point that other folks were talking about earlier today, now we have a platform that we can go to the property owner or other service providers and say, do you want to join this passive fiber infrastructure that exists in this venue? And it's really a way of trying to change the economics, because we all know what's happening with data, unlimited data, and just the data usage, and what that is doing to the wireless carriers. We need to be thinking about new, different business models. ICN is one of those ways of doing that, as well as a way of attracting those other customers who could utilize that fiber.
Okay. Eric, you've got a dog in this one, so.
Sure.
Yeah.
I agree. I think the first thing is you have to take your customers where you find them, right? And as I mentioned earlier, when Transit Wireless first started dealing with the MTA to build out in the New York City transit environment, it was purely a multi-carrier DAS. That's what we were looking at. That was what the business model was based off of, and that's how we approached it. But as things progress, you have to evolve with where you are. And we saw that instead of just building for that infrastructure, we built a dual network right on top of that for Wi-Fi, which the business case on Wi-Fi is still evolving, right? No one knows where that's going to go, right? And additionally, which has evolved over time from our standpoint, which in other venues you deal with a landlord or some other entity, but with us, with the transit authority, there's so many services that the transit authority requires that by us having our network within that environment, having the expertise of understanding telecommunications, the networks, having boots on the ground to do that, it gave us the opportunity to work hand in hand with them to provide solutions to problems that didn't exist when we started out. But as you progress, you need that. Listen, I'm sure people like having the countdown clocks working in the subways. Well, how does that happen? We have to support that on our end. We have to work with, the transit officials in order to see what they want around the bend, because it's always going to be an evolving infrastructure, which brings us to any sort of infrastructure that you deal with, which is the old business model of saying, we're going to build a network and the carriers are going to pay for it. That doesn't work. You have to build a network that you own, infrastructure that you own, and you need to figure out ways to monetize it. And it can't just be based on 4 customers. You have to look at it from a global perspective and how you're going to service the environment that you're in.
Great. And so, Cliff, Ray, Jason, we've talked about you guys want a piece of the action indoors. So what is changing? What is a potential sweet spot? If you can, without giving away business, corporate secrets, talk to us a little bit about how are you going to go after that business segment? What does it look like? What is the opportunity? And how do you differentiate?
Yeah, sure. So we're very excited about that whole area, and that's what we're really gearing up for. We're gearing up through our relationships with the real estate community and our expertise in real estate and co-location, as mentioned earlier, Ethernet and fiber and wavelength capabilities, and also as a core competency, our ability to deal with carriers, because we are currently a carrier's carrier. But I think what the real issue here is that everyone is going to want 5 bars of service in every nook and cranny of every office building. And we're a strictly business-to-business company, but in every office building in the city, in every city, right? So how do you make that happen? Of course, we all know that there's certain economic hurdles around deploying DAS systems, which they have the carriers pulling back their capital contributions now for that. I mean, and some of these venues are going to be too small. It's past that date. So what we are envisioning and what we've put together actually is the ability to combine the services of wireline providers with a DAS infrastructure. Technically they're 2 separate infrastructures that exist in the building. You have a fiber riser that services your DAS system and a fiber riser that's going to service your wireline customers. But by tying that to our core network, our transport network, the customers or the tenants in that building can access over 1,000 different carriers, that clouds and financial market services companies and storage companies and what have you that exist in the data centers and carrier hotels and exchanges that our core network ties to. So we think there's an opportunity there to partner up with the building owners, potentially through a rev share type of model, and deliver a full system for not just the wireless end of it, but the wireline portion of it as well, and including all the incidental things that you find in the building, BMS, video surveillance cameras, and whatever else is lying around. And we've been building the infrastructure internally, corporately, to handle that with our back office OSS inventory control system, so we can provision, manage, watch it, maintain it, and provide service assurance to the customer. So the challenge there is really about the capital. So capital, could come from us, it could come from the building owner, it could be a joint venture. But at the end of the day, that's where we see the broad market, or the market broadening greatly, and hence the biggest opportunity.
And so let me ask a question.
This is going to be a hardball.
I'm going to turn up the heat a little bit. Right. So do you envision the role that you will play? Will you be competing with the likes of Transit Wireless and American Tower in owning and operating? In the previous presentation, and I guess here's where I'm going with this, is in the previous presentation, my friend Jay from PCTEL mentioned, hey, indoors, start thinking of building these networks like a fiber provider and not necessarily care what gets passed through. And of course, the thesis of that presentation was converged services, and the definition laid out for us was basically, think of it as communications plus one, right? So with what you're looking to do, having built out this infrastructure, are you looking to own and operate indoors the network?
Yeah, that's American Tower and other neutral host type providers could be our partners in these deals, clearly. Okay. We're really, like I said before, we're a carrier neutral underlying infrastructure. We do layer 1 and layer 2, and actually we'll be doing IP later on this year. So we're climbing up the stack a bit. But at the end of the day, what we facilitate is the transport and access of services to and from, right? So it could be that we are in competition, or it could be that we're in partnership, and we're very broad-minded, and we have the financial flexibility as well to look at a variety of different solutions. And as we all know, each of these buildings is unique in itself. They're all snowflakes, and for a whole variety of reasons, and this brings in a whole variety of different aspects to it.
Okay. Guys?
Well, the business model's changed quite a bit, though, in the last few years. So in the old days, the carriers just built their own network for themselves. Obviously, there were inroads with towers, carriers don't own the towers anymore, they go on the same tower. Then it started with, you know, coming on to metro networks in the cities. They would lease fiber from metro providers instead of building their own. Obviously, the same has happened with colos. Now, if you look at the model that they're using, for instance, to build submarine cables across the oceans, they're building them as consortiums. And it's not even so much the carriers, it's also the content companies that are obviously driving some of these. And a new model, and you'll see some of this coming out in some of the new long-haul networks that are going on, are actually consortiums, where instead of you acting as the company that's just going to own it, build it, operate it, and sell fibers, what you are is the partner in the consortium. You have the anchors, which is important, because as was said before, the prices come way down in fiber and capacity. It still costs the same to build it, but what you get for the IRUs and the leases is dropped through the floor. So the only way you're going to get to build the network and to finance it is to get the anchors. But if you try to go out and sell it to 5, 10 different companies first, it's like herding cats. So you end up in a situation where if you can get those, say, 3 or 4 co-build partners, and together you come into the partnership as the operator, you get your network built. They basically pay for the infrastructure to get built then. They share it amongst 3, 4 companies so that they're happy. But you still have about 75% of the capacity that then you can go and do other business with.
Okay. Ray?
Yeah, so when I look at ourselves, ZenFi, in the ecosystem, we see ourselves, and I think we take a different view than Cliff does, we see ourselves as an underlying enabler, underlying provider in that ecosystem to provide the connectivity. So as we attack this in-building, and by the way, when I look at the systems supporting in-building versus outdoor, there's a fundamental piece of the infrastructure that's the same, and that's that connectivity. As we morph into this from a distributed base station environment to a more centralized base station environment, which then evolves into a cloud RAN environment, I see that same infrastructure, that space, power, and connectivity infrastructure supporting both in-building and outdoor equally well as the subways, right? It's Eric's model at Transit with this base station hotel, distributed colo, call it what you will, where with baseband processing is located. The fundamental piece that's missing is the front haul out. Now that front haul can go to a light pole, can go to a subway station, or it could go to a building to tie into the American Tower riser network. And we don't see ourselves owning that infrastructure. We see companies like American Tower, Crown, and Extenet owning those infrastructures and us providing connectivity and centralized colocation environments for the baseband processing, and let them do what they do best. They manage those carrier relationships better than anyone. Clearly, American Tower is at the top of the food chain there, and they know how to do that. But we know how to build fiber infrastructure to support just about any application. The application here happens to be a very dense, high-capacity front-haul network that hasn't been built yet. So, again, we see ourselves as underlying support in that ecosystem, not attempting to be, any more than that.
Yeah. So, yeah, Alex, I wanted to invite you in to comment this because it potentially impacts your business. And I remember years ago when the small cell story started cranking up, and I remember telling my sales teams that, hey, you're going to start to see new faces in deals that you haven't seen before. And so as we look at the evolving models in order to address even large public venues as well as the enterprise space, do you see these guys, the dark fiber providers, as friends, as foes, as partners, or all the above?
What was that expression about keeping your friends close? No, I mean, I think the nature of our business is that there's a lot of frenemies, and there always has been, and I think going forward, that'll still be the case. I think it really comes back to, we're asked by a customer to deliver something, and it's going to come down to cost, to speed, and then the predictability of being able to deliver what it is they're looking for from a network deployment perspective. So I think what Cliff and Ray were saying is absolutely spot on, that we would look to try to work with a company like that. And for those of you who've never heard the term IRU, an IRU is a beautiful thing for a company like American Tower or someone else, because we don't necessarily need to own all the infrastructure. We need to just, as a REIT, we just need to have certain rights that we can capitalize and amortize. So I would say that we have conversations, we partner with all sorts of different people. We sometimes own the fiber, sometimes we IRU the fiber. And I want to go back to, I think, something, Eric, you were talking about, just the whole convergence. I'll raise my hand that I had never heard of ICT, throwing out another acronym, up until a few years ago, Information Communication Technology, because I was a tower guy and then a DAS guy, and it was always about the cellular network. But information communication technology and that convergence of the two, of IT and CT, communication technology, I think is playing itself out. I think most of you probably have used Waze before. That's a beautiful application of ICT, because it wouldn't work if you didn't have a good cellular signal. It wouldn't work if they didn't have great server farms and bringing it together. Well, that same sort of concept can work on the infrastructure side. There is no reason why you need to have a single carrier fiber network only working for that carrier. It can work for other carriers. It can work for other service providers. And I'll go back to what I talked about at the beginning, which from an American Tower perspective, a good 30%, and hopefully there's no analysts in the room, and I don't want to get quoted, but there's about 30% of our revenue that comes from non-carriers. So why wouldn't we take that same perspective when we look at whether it's venue-based solutions or small cell outdoor solutions? It only makes sense not to have these duplicitous networks, given all the challenges that we're talking about.
Okay. So I'd like to shift gears again. Traditionally, we've observed that when it comes to the inbuilt or the DAS market, that revenues are generally 70 to 80% is indoors, that remaining 30 to 20% would be outdoors. So we've talked about some of these market forces, both economic models as well as the pain is starting to become more acute within the enterprise, that venue owners are going to need to begin to figure out how to solve for this problem to enable connectivity indoors. So what about outdoors? I'm going to shift to outdoors. So you've got those market forces. Obviously, you've got 5G looming. This notion of, in order to densify, true densification looks like deploying tens of thousands of small cells, for lack of a better, kind of a general term. It could be ODAS, it could be small cells. You can kind of go through the hierarchy of, macro cells, picocell, or microcells, picocells, DAS, small cells. But what I'd like to ask the panelists to jump in on is what is going to be the impact? Are we going to see a more significant spend in order to enable 5G? There's, of course, FirstNet that was announced a couple of weeks ago with AT&T. How's that going to impact your businesses and your market outlook from a technology perspective as well as a business perspective?
So if you just take it back of the envelope, look at this. If you look at the build plans over the next 18 months that we're seeing from Verizon, Sprint, AT&T, and T-Mobile, as well as some other non-traditional wireless carriers, we see 7,000 to 8,000 small cells, street-level small cells in the build plan over the next 18 months. That's pretty significant. We got into this business in 2008, building our first network. We built NextG's network. and we built Mobility's network in its entirety here in New York. We did 1,600 nodes back then between 2008 and 2010. Then things slowed down. There were hundreds of nodes built for the next 4 years, 5 years or so. Then all of a sudden, we've seen this massive uptick, right? And there are 7,000 to 8,000 nodes on the table. We're doing 7,500 nodes for a network we're building that's for a non-traditional carrier, that's fiber to the curb. So you look at the capital that's being planned to be, or that is being deployed today. It's a massive undertaking. So it's a massive infrastructure build that we haven't seen in the wireless space here in New York City ever.
Yeah.
Eric, you're underground, but
Was that, well,
you got that fiber infrastructure.
yeah, I will say that if you thought, we've the densification has taken hold, you haven't seen anything yet. Because, it's not going to be DAS. It's going to be that small cell 5G rollout that, everything's going to get to the edge. And you think we're at the edge, but we're not. Because everything is requiring more bandwidth, more connectivity, and it's just the evolution of the business. So I would say I agree with Ray. I think there's a lot of opportunity, but I would also say that the right partners have to come with correct business models and understand that you need to partner with with who you're talking to and look at it from a global standpoint. Don't just try to make your whole business case based off of one customer or two customers, and that's how you're going to recoup your investment. Your investment has to be a long-term perspective, taking into effect that you're an infrastructure provider and you're looking to maximize your abilities with your infrastructure that you bring out to the edge, but utilizing that for multiple platforms with multiple providers.
Okay. I got to jump on this Bachman-Turner overdrive, you ain't seen nothing yet headline. And if I could, let me pivot for a second, and we've got some more time left. I would like to invite some audience questions, and so if somebody's ready to go, raise their hand and we'll get a microphone to you. Alex, it looks like you're about ready to lean in with perhaps a follow-through to that, or maybe Cliff or Jason, you've got a comment about the outdoor.
Well, why don't we see if there's some questions first?
Microphone. We'll just grab one. Let's get a panelist to jump in then and continue to wrestle this one down to the ground.
Well, I mean, one thing I'll add to the conversation regarding 5G and the densification, and it's something that I don't think we've talked about yet, and that's profitability. We're all here as companies that need to make a profit. We need to make a return. And so I think that one of the biggest challenges as an industry is, we want to serve our customers, and we hear every day from our customers, what is it that they're looking for? And in order to deliver that, we're going to probably need to get the price points that will make us uncomfortable. So we are thinking about different business models. Ultimately, all that needs to be sustainable. It all needs to allow us, and really, and I think our customers would agree, it would need to allow the ecosystem to be sustainable. And so I think, another thing we haven't talked about is for connectivity are fixed wireless types of solutions or other sort of wireless connectivity solutions. So I imagine that in all of what is happening in New York City, and I think in New York City probably first and foremost, you're probably going to see, in addition to all the great fiber and the capacity that's going into play, is that you're going to start seeing other business models that are looking at wireless types of front haul solutions. Because it's all about trying to drive the price points to a place that the carriers can afford it, and folks like us and others can do this profitably and do it in a sustainable way. And so I'd be curious to hear, I know you guys are fiber folks, but where is that play for a fixed wireless type of connectivity? And sorry, Mike, for taking your job here for asking questions, but.
Well, it's fixed wireless to a point. you still somewhere have to get back to fiber, and then it's that fiber that's going to get back to the switches, and then back to the data centers and everywhere else that all the content's coming from. So, you go to 5G, it's just that much more demand on the backhaul, that much more demand aggregated into the long haul, and somebody's got to pay for that too.
Okay.
Well, let me also put something else on the table and change a little direction here for a second. Mike, you sent an email out that when we were talking about what we're going to talk about, and you ended it with, what do you see going forward over in New York City over the next 3 to 5 years? What are we going to be talking about? And that was in my mind earlier as I was talking to some people here, and where I see it going, and back to where Alex was talking about New York City and what's going to happen, is the mobile telecom franchise and the cable telecom franchise here in New York, everything's coming to a head in 2020, okay? And, Deputy Commissioner Al Jenkins, who's here from Do It, is under his leadership and his input. Do It is really looking to see how they're going to reallocate their franchisees and what's going to happen in terms of delivering broadband services throughout New York City. And I think that it's going to be very interesting over the next few years of how that progresses. And that's going to be the basis of how these business models are going to evolve. Because without a partner in the municipality, it's really hard to achieve the goals of everyone in our industry, right? And I think, there's been evolution in the mobile telecom franchise from when that started a number of years ago, and the concepts behind it was great. But right now, there's thousands of locations for pole tops with DAS that there's only a limited supply of those locations going forward. And as we talked about with additional rollouts, there's going to be a need to get close to the edge, close to the edge, close to the edge. And I'm really encouraged by what's going on from the city perspective and how we're going to work together as private and public entities in order to get that connectivity out to the edge.
Yeah, great point. I think I've got about 2 minutes here and want to keep us on schedule. I would like to ask a question. It seemed as though we heard a couple of requests throughout the day. From AT&T earlier, we heard, hey, venue owner, you need to pony up for these networks. It's not going to be all of us. We heard from the venue owner that, hey, we need to find different models, again, harping on the coax model. How do we need to do more fiber to the edge. We need to find a way to deliver more services on the infrastructure. So let me give you the opportunity to call out to other members of the ecosystem, as owners and operators and dark fiber providers. What is your ask of perhaps the carriers, of the venues, the systems integrators, the OEMs, if you had a simple ask or a complex ask, what would it be?
All right, I'll take that too. I think it's been touched on, but let me just say that it's a complex question that everyone has to come to the table. And no one wants to hear, I've got to pony up, or I don't want to pay the full rate, or what it's going to be. But at the end of the day, we're all in a business, and that business needs to have a return. And, but you have to come to it with the understanding that you can't just have one party paying the freight for everything. So is it fees that carriers have to pay? Sure. They're not, and I heard that. There's some venues that, carrier's going to say, I'll connect, I'll give you signal strength, but I'm not going to spend my time and resources, paying fees in order to access that facility, because they've done their analysis on it. They know that that's not worth it to them, comparatively. They're going to put their dollars someplace else. They will put their dollars someplace, and, you just need to understand that it's not all going to come from one enterprise. So you might need to deal with the venue owner. Or in my case, it's been the transit authority might have to pony up certain services. Or we run our own Wi-Fi network. So it's dealing with the cable companies who want to, proliferate their Wi-Fi network. It could be, someone who wants to, digital advertising and supporting that. So you need to look at the venue that you're looking to acquire or that you're looking to deploy to and understand the entirety of the ecosystem. And as long as you're fair with all the parties involved and you're providing a service for a benefit that they're getting, everyone's willing to pay for a benefit that they receive. You just can't assume that you're going to be funded by someone with an unlimited checkbook. That doesn't happen.
Great, thank you. I think, Eric, you're going to have to, you've had the last word. I know we had a question. I apologize. Hopefully during the break at the conclusion of the next presentation, we could have that question and dialogue over cocktails. So if I could ask for a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much. And again, these folks would certainly invite further discussion during the cocktail session. And I know Alyssa's going to introduce my good friend Mike Rosato, who's going to help us finish strong and share his insights and other hijinks. Thank you again, everybody.